how should I know why I behave so? How should I know why I don't behave so? And now here's a long section from Guoxiang, which I think is very meaningful. Whether or not it's a good interpretation of what ZhuangZi is trying to do here, I don't know, but it's very, very long and meaningful here. It says, some people in the world say that the penumbra depends on the shadow on the bodily form, and the bodily form on the creator. But may I ask whether this creator is something existent, or is it nothingness? If it is nothingness, how can it create anything? If it is something existent, it will fall short of being a thing that could manifest all bodily forms. Therefore, we must clarify that all bodily forms first have to derive from things themselves before we can begin to speak with such people about any creator. This is why when involvement with the realm of extant things occurs, although we get a penumbra again and again, this never happens, but that it is occasions of self-transformation operating within arcane obscurity. Therefore, the creator is no master, for all things create themselves, and since all things create themselves, we don't depend, or they don't depend on anything else for this to happen. Such is the true way of heaven and earth. It follows that the self and the other might be related causally, and bodily forms and shadows might come into existence together, but although such arcane coincidences occur again and again, no dependency is ever involved. I'm going to delete this recording, and I'm going to redo this space after I finish reading this section, because I want to go through, I don't actually want to use a Habsmeyer and Williams translation and commentators, because I think this extended section, there's another paragraph to go, is incredibly just philosophically valuable, regardless of its relationship to this section of the ZhuangZi, but also just a good interpretation. But what I'm getting from this is, he's saying, look, what do things depend on to be what they are? And we've seen Guoxiang earlier in this section also comment on this. And he says, all right, well, if we're going to say that they depend on a creator, a ZhuangZi, the one that makes things, makes the end maker-fier or creator, then Guoxiang's got a question for us. And when I hear this, I'm like, isn't this what Christians and so many others, when they're talking about infinite causality, they want to go back and break it by saying, well, from God, everything terminates in God. So you have an infinite regress of like this, did this, did this, did this, did this, did this, and it goes on forever. Where are you going to terminate it? You're going to terminate it in some unmoved mover or divinity. Guoxiang is taking a bit of a different tack here. He's saying, okay, we have our infinite regress, and Guoxiang appears to agree that the infinite regress is an issue. Because remember, up top, he said something along the lines of, there would be no end to such seeking and assigning responsibility. And then he concludes that therefore we're going about this the wrong way, and things have their existence in and of themselves. But here he's saying, okay, we have our infinite regress where everything depends on everything else. So the penumbra depends on the shadow on the bodily form on, and the termination point is the ZhuangZi, so the creator. So then Guoxiang asks, may I ask whether this creator is something existent, or is it nothingness? If it is nothingness, how can it create anything? So that typical, can't get something from nothing. I think you can't get something from anything that is not that something, which is also a point Guoxiang makes elsewhere. But, the typical argument that most people accept is you can't get something from nothing. So he's like, all right, well, if the creator is nothing, then there's nothing there to create anything, so we're done. And if it is something existent, it will fall short of being a thing that could manifest all bodily forms. I'm just looking at a translation here. I'm curious what the original material says, but I think he's just saying okay, if God is something, then he's not everything. He is what he is. He's limited. And so therefore he's just another thing, right? Because therefore we must clarify that all bodily forms first have to derive from things themselves before we can begin to speak with such people about any creator. Okay, so if God is something existent, the creator is something existent, he's going to be limited as what he is. And so therefore he's going to fall short of being literally everything. He's not going to be me, you, and everything else. He's going to fall short of something that could manifest all bodily things because he would just be what he is himself. So he'd be a limited entity. Otherwise he wouldn't be himself, right? So if there is this creator thing, then it is what it is and not what it is not. And therefore it falls short of being able to manifest all bodily forms. And yet we have all these bodily forms that are still waiting to derive themselves from somewhere in this model. So we wind up with an issue, and that's why he's rejecting the talk of creator. And what does he get to? He gets to his model now, which says, therefore the creator is no master, for all things create themselves. And since all things create themselves, they don't depend on anything else for this to happen. Such is the true way of heaven and earth. It follows that the self and the other might be related causally, and bodily forms and shadows might come into existence together. But although such arcane coincidences occur again and again, no dependency is ever involved. Okay. So the word arcane is not usually one I see outside of, computer role-playing games or something. But it's the word they're using to translate what's usually like dark and mysterious. So, yeah, all right. So he's saying, yeah, okay, so we've gotten rid of the creator theory because there's an infinite regress, and the creator is not going to be an answer for that because the creator is either going to be nothing or he's just going to be one more link in that chain, and he's never going to be satisfactory to be the whole. And so instead, what I guess ZhuangZi is saying is that the only thing that's going to satisfy this issue of existence is if everything exists in its own right. And then he says things might be related causally. So, a shadow might stand in a certain relationship to a penumbra and in a certain relationship to whatever body is casting the shadow, and they might come into existence together. But although these arcane coincidences, these mysterious occurrences occur again and again, no dependency is ever involved. Again, dependency here being taken as existential, I guess. So it's not like the body is creating the shadow, but rather the shadow is the shadow, the body is the body, and they come together in their own right, and each has its own existence and its own selfness. Whereas the other model was the penumbra's actions are controlled or given to it by something else, or its existence is given to it by something else, and we wind up with this regress of, well, what gave the penumbra its existence and its actions? Well, the shadow. What gave the shadow? Oh, the body. What gave the body? Well, whatever gave the body, because we've gotten into this situation where everything we can point at is reliant on something else for its existence. And he wants to break that and just say, no, everything is what it is in its own right. And therefore we don't get trapped in that. So I think that's, and that's not even half of what he's written on this section. He goes on, be clear about what this principle is, for it allows each of the myriad things to revert to its own embodiment, to find its progenitor, and thus need not depend on anything external. As such, external things have no need to refuse, and the inner self has no need to feel proud. This is always why things exist as if they were induced to do so, and yet remain unaware how it is that existence happens. All right, hold on, let me reread this. Be clear about what this principle is, for it allows each of the myriad things to revert to its own embodiment. Okay, so its own body, to find its progenitor, and thus need not depend on anything external. Well, the principle is this idea that things exist in their own right. That's the true way of heaven and earth, not depending on something else to be what they are or to exist. And so if that is the case, allows each of the myriad things to revert to its own embodiment, to find its progenitor, and thus need not depend on anything external. All right, so once you realize you are what you are in your own right, you can kind of realize what you are rather than looking at things that you are not and trying to find yourself in what is not you. It's like if the shadow looks at the body to figure out what it is, well, the body is not the shadow. So it's kind of looking at what it is not to try and figure out what it is. As such, external things have no need to refuse, and the inner self has no need to feel proud. Okay, I guess a penumbra and shadow are trying to compete with each other, right? But if we're looking into ourselves to see why we are a certain way, we're not going to get into those fights. This is always why things exist as if they were induced to do so, and yet remain unaware how it is that existence happens. Since all equally share this trait, each thing thrives and yet remains unaware how it is that it thrives. Now, to say that the penumbra is in a causal relationship with the shadow is like saying that they both exist, but no dependency is involved between them. Thus it is that although the myriad things all collectively develop fully thanks to nature, each one appears independently one after the other. Therefore, the penumbra is not something made by the shadow. The shadow is not ordered about by the bodily form, and the bodily form does not owe its transformation to nothingness. Thus it is that whether transformation takes place or not, or whether behavior is so or not, depends on a thing's innate tendencies. Without exception, this always happens spontaneously. So, as such, how may it be understood? Therefore, leave things alone and don't attempt to assist them, for then essentials and details, the inner and the outer, shall all be unself-consciously realized and tally perfectly together, with no impressions left in the process. However, if one were to invest this immediate cause with responsibility for making things happen, while forgetting that they actually happen spontaneously, this would be to take a progenitor, from something external and abandon the master that exists within, which results in the creation of something to cherish and exalt. Although one might wish to promote and make this something universally applicable, what is so exalted actually already exists in one's own breast, so how could anything foreign to you manage to have it? All right, like I said, I gotta redo this space and focus more on ZhuangZi instead of the one I was originally reading, but here we go.